became Peter 20 minutes ago. So that's the story I have with Reggie, 5-year-old. But they 4 brothers, all successful, and youngest one, I told Johnny, I held him. He was a milk bottle when I first came. And I told him, you need to meet General Brown because Johnny Till is a Black Hawk helicopter and a full colonel in the U.S. Army. So I have distinguished brothers and sister-in-laws today in this. I guess if I don't mention my wife, then I will have all kind of trouble. So I better mention. I told my wife, say, I am invited to Veterans Celebration, Korean War, and I can go in myself, or one of my friends would take me. He volunteered to take me to. So she said, you know what the June 21st means? So I said, what it means? That's our 55th wedding anniversary. So my wife is here today. Her name is Sandy Yoon. When we got married 55 years ago, I thought that she was so innocent, almost I felt conscience-stricken. This girl doesn't know Peter Yoon at all. No money, no family, nothing to proud of. But the only thing she trusted, knowing I love God and I love serve the Lord Jesus Christ. So she ventured out. She would marry Korean fellow, but it lasted 55 years today. So that's my family side, and I supposed to not to have a time General Brown's his time. So yeah. How much time we have?
I think. Let me say. I think a good plan would be for General Brown to give us a few comments, and then following the cultural performance, we're going to be having a reception in the lobby, and you can meet the speakers and you can keep talking.
Okay.
Okay. Would that be okay?
I'll just finish within 5 minutes.
Okay.
In fact, I didn't have a permission from Mr. Ayer. I was going to teach one of the main economic principles, diminishing marginal utility. That's one of the fundamental economic principles. But we have to do. So let me say how I became Christian. Well, during the Korean War, I was with other refugees, but somehow I was separated from all, and we were moving down, and then I found myself top of the mountain, pine trees, and small pine trees, and snowing. So I thought, I'm going to freeze to death and starve to death, because I was so hungry, hard to anything eat. Soybeans or kudzu. I noticed the kudzu plant on highway all over in U.S. So if you dig that the kudzu root, you have like a starch bag, like a sweet potato. So that's one of the diets when you don't have anything to eat. So I was at the top of the mountain. So I said, I'm going to die, freezing to death, starve to death, but nobody knows where my body would be. So I said, I went a couple times Methodist Church Sunday School, and they said God is all-powerful. He can do anything He wants it. So I said, I prayed a simple prayer. God, you know my situation. If you can do anything for me, this is the time you can do for me. And I will serve you. I will honor you. So that's a simple prayer. Then I felt like going down the certain direction from the mountain. An hour or so, I ran into town completely empty, but all kinds of foods, clothing, and so, this is a really amazing thing. And I found 9 grandmothers staying in one place. I asked them why this town is empty. Well, everybody escaped from communist soldiers, but they didn't care because rather than freezing to death on the way, they just died in the warm house. So I asked them whether I could stay that night. They say yes. And next morning, I was the only boy, so I could gather some woods they can cook breakfast. But so amazingly, I heard some soldiers' noise, and I looked, and then about 5, 6 Korean soldiers were there. So they saw me, they came toward me, and then one of the soldiers, we looked at each other, and that was my 5th grade school teacher. So I said, Teacher Jang. So that he said, oh, you, Subyung. So we met, that's the first time I cried, because I was a hopeless situation, but I ran into a store, the 5th grade teacher. So I asked him, since you are going back toward North Korea, recapturing the South Korean part and go to North Korea, would you ask your commander, I can stay with them, with you, and with the soldiers until we reach our town? So that he got the permission from Heavy Motor Company, 32nd Regiment, 7th Division. So suddenly, Bagger became the member of the U.S., the best, mightiest, richest military family. And I had the smallest they can find uniform and mess kit. I had that. We were always following about 10 or 15 miles from front line. I have my own sleeping bag. So I stayed with them until all the bombed out churches or schools. So 2 years I stayed with them. Such a wonderful group of Korean veterans. They gave me all kind of presents. So I was really a member of one of the military. I had our own mess kit, sea rations. So I liked that the best food in my life I tasted pork and beans. You have that thing, you make a fire and heat up. Oh, I still can feel that the pork and beans in that can. So that's how I started my religious life, and amazingly, always bring somebody. I told Mr. Air, is why Peter Young got this Greg's life, but it's wonderful. So many people involved in my life to praise God, and wonderful.
Yes. God bless you. Thank you very much, Dr. Yunan. Yeah, God bless you. And
keep it real short, just like you.
Yep. Okay, we're gonna dance. Oh, actually, why don't you introduce yourself? It'll be fast.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Hard act to follow, but I'm going to try, and I'm going to talk about a success story. And I got to tell you, I am always honored and at ease when I'm in a group of veterans and their families. You are my kind of people, and I'm awfully proud to be here with you. I served in the United States Army, but whether you're Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine, you're my brothers and sisters. I had the privilege of serving in an infantry battalion on the DMZ in Korea in the mid-'80s. Later, and I attribute my experiences in Korea to much of my military education. I learned an awful lot there and hopefully applied it effectively later. My last assignment in the United States Army was Commanding General of the United States Army in the Pacific. I've served along with that lovely lady in the third row down there, who Dr. Yoon, on the 19th of June, we celebrated our 54th wedding anniversary. So, wow. Thank you very much. I have always thought that what you and your brothers and sisters in Korea before the armistice and during the conflict built, the foundation that you built, created a very successful follow-on decades and decades. And that's what I'm going to try and talk a little bit about today, is the success of the U.S. Republic of Korea alliance since the armistice. So, Greg, if you'll take me to the Korean Armistice Agreement slide. It's important to remember that the United States and the Republic of South Korea fought side by side during that conflict, along with a whole lot of other United Nations partners. There are countries all over the world that shared in your fight, our fight, and shared in the success. But what came out of that after the terrible battles that you went through was an armistice that was signed on July 27th, 1953. And it did a number of really big things. It ended the conflict that had been going on for over 3 years. It did not establish a peace, but it did create a ceasefire that has been in place ever since. Next slide. It created what all you know is the DMZ, the 2.1 kilometer side, each side of the military demarcation line. It provided for the repatriation of prisoners of war, which many of you remember at that time, that was a huge issue. How were we going to get the prisoners of war back that had been captured from the United Nations Command, and how were we going to repatriate all of the North Korean and Chinese prisoners of war? And there were a lot of them. But they hashed it out, and it happened. It took several years to make it work, but they made it happen. It established a military armistice commission, and that commission is still in place today, and it meets occasionally when there's an issue on the DMZ that needs to be resolved so that we don't wind up getting into another fight there between the ROC Army and the North Korean Army. And then in 1953, before the armistice was signed, the United States government and the government of South Korea signed a peace treaty, a mutual defense treaty that would promote peace, defend against external threats to the Korean Peninsula, and bring South Korea into the Pacific Defense League of democratic nations in the Pacific. That treaty is still in effect today. It's been modified and changed a few times, but it's still in effect today. Next slide. Now that's the DMZ right in the middle, that red line in the middle. It is one of the most heavily defended lines in the entire world. Today, right now as we sit here, there are South Korean and North Korean soldiers facing each other across that demilitarized zone. Both sides put out ambushes and put out patrols every single day. And there are quite often firefights still on the DMZ when one side or the other encounters something they don't understand. And so you might see flares being fired into the air, and you might hear mortars and artillery being fired. But the DMZ is still in place, and it has contributed to peace on the Korean Peninsula ever since the armistice. Next slide. My introduction to the DMZ happened the morning after I arrived in South Korea as a young infantry army major. My boss handed me his map of the DMZ with circles on it, and he had names like Porkchop Hill and Outpost Vegas and the Battle of Kunsong and Whitehorse, all those names I had read about. But he put me in his Jeep and he said, don't come back till you've seen every one of these and talk to the folks at Guard Post Collier and Guard Post Olette in the DMZ. Well, the first thing that hit me when I drove into the DMZ and looked out there at what my soldiers called the Yamas, those huge hills that some of you fought up and down many times. You would take it and then you'd have to back off of it and then you'd come back and take it again. But what hit me was, my gosh, what those men and women that were there in 1953, mostly that part of it, went through on those hills, those Yamas, and the battles they fought. Next slide. No, back up one. Now, what came out of the armistice was the creation of a very successful command and control organization that has been in place formally since 1978, remains in place today, and it works. So what you have first is the Combined Forces Command. It's commanded by, I think right now it's General Xavier Brunson, an U.S. Army 4-star general, and it's deputy commanded by, I believe, ROC 4-star General Sunshil Kang, I believe, is the deputy commander. Now in peacetime, U.S. forces command and control U.S. forces in Korea. South Korean forces command and control their own forces. But if war is declared, if we go to war, then the Combined Forces Command takes over wartime command of all U.S. and South Korean forces on the peninsula to defend the peninsula and eject any invaders. The U.S. Army 4-star that's there in that position, he commands the Combined Forces Command. He also commands the United Nations Command, which remains in place since the end of the war and through the armistice, to bring the United Nations in if the armistice is violated. And he also commands U.S. Forces Korea, which is basically 8th Army, 2nd Infantry Division, some naval forces, 2 squadrons from the Air Force that are there permanently on the peninsula, and then any forces that are introduced, U.S. forces that are introduced. Now, that command and control arrangement has worked very, very well. Every year, General Brunson or his predecessors executes big training exercises inside Korea where ROC and U.S. forces train together. They train on the ground in operations that sometimes were called team spirit exercises. Some of you may have been through some team spirits. And they also have a series of exercises called Ulchi-Focus Lens, where they bring all of the staffs together and they exercise their war plans. If you go into one of the big command posts where General Brunson and his U.S. staff will be there, sitting next to every U.S. officer, warrant officer, non-commissioned officer, you'll find a South Korean counterpart. And they operate together. They overcome any language barriers, and they make the exercises work, and they've been doing this for decades. It's a real success story. And they train that way every single year. Next slide. In addition to those exercises and the command and control arrangement, it's very important what support the United States provides to the Combined Forces Command every day. When I was in Korea, we were still flying U-2s as reconnaissance, strategic reconnaissance aircraft out of airfields in Korea. Now most of that has been replaced with satellites because they do a better job. But we maintain 2 full squadrons of Air Force aircraft, mostly focused on air dominance and ground support, and they're there all the time. And then you can read about it just about any week of the year. There'll be flights of other U.S. Air Force aircraft flying in, and Navy aircraft, flying into South Korea, into the air bases there to reinforce and to exercise with their counterparts. Next slide. There's not a lot of big Navy stationed in Korea. There are Navy bases in Korea, U.S. Navy bases in Korea. They generally have smaller support craft there, but again, just like the aircraft that come from other places in the world, U.S. Air Force aircraft, you'll constantly have a carrier battle group somewhere near the Korean Peninsula, and we have attack and missile submarines that flow in and out of Korean waters all the time. One very interesting new twist on this is in 2023, the United States government made an agreement with the South Korean government to begin refurbishing U.S. Navy ships in South Korean shipbuilding facilities. It takes some of the pressure off of our shipbuilding facilities that are overbooked most of the time and gets them done very well and fast. Next slide. The 2nd Infantry Division it fought in Korea along with the 7th and the 24th and some of the ones that the veterans mentioned. It's been there, stationed there, and the flag of the 2nd's been in Korea ever since the end of the war. It's still there and headquartered in South Korea, and it maintains active Army ground forces there. And up until the early 90s, the 2nd Infantry Division actually patrolled a portion of the demilitarized zone alongside South Korean forces on either of their flanks. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, the decision was made that the ROC Army actually preferred having the 2nd Infantry Division as a backup to them in the event something happened on the DMZ. And so we pulled U.S. forces off of the DMZ and put them in locations where they could reinforce very rapidly. The pictures you see there at the bottom of the ground support slide, those are actually U.S. Army soldiers that were in the DMZ in the mid-80s and went out on patrols and ambushes every single night and did it very proudly. And in fact, they went through such rigorous training and workups to do those patrols that as the U.S. Army decided to reintroduce our Ranger battalions, which had disappeared from the Army inventory during Vietnam, they came to Korea, and company commanders and first sergeants and platoon sergeants that had served in those units of the 2nd Infantry Division on the DMZ were highly sought after to come take commands and leadership positions in the new Ranger battalions, and it was done very successfully. Next slide. Story I think many of you probably partially remember, but I happened to be there and got to witness this. In 1983, President Reagan came to South Korea on a presidential visit. He was visiting his presidential counterpart in Seoul, and they went through the normal discussions of how we were going to support the Koreans and how the Koreans are going to support us there on the peninsula. But before he left, he said, "I'm not leaving the Korean peninsula until I see American service members on the DMZ." Now, this was a big deal. No American president had ever visited the DMZ before, and there was a lot of concern about, well, how will the North Koreans take this? You know, here comes a president of the United States going to come up to the DMZ himself and stand there looking right across the border, as you see him pointing, right across the DMZ into North Korea. Well, President Reagan wouldn't take no for an answer, and he said, "I'm going." So he got in his helicopter in Seoul, and he cranked it up and started flying toward the DMZ. When he did that, when his helicopter cranked and took off toward the DMZ, every attack and utility helicopter in the 2nd Infantry Division was lined up on a runway or a golf course, and they cranked their engines at the same time, fully loaded, armed and ready to go to a fight if they needed to. Well, the message was seen loud and clear by the North Koreans. Many of you know that if you go to the DMZ today, it is lined, the North Korean side is lined with North Korean artillery. Big, powerful artillery pieces, thousands of them. And in fact, many of them can reach all the way to Seoul from the DMZ. Well, for the period that President Reagan flew into the DMZ, got out of his helicopter, the reconnaissance aircraft and some satellites watched the North Korean artillery being turned from pointing to the south to pointing to the north. They got the message. Don't mess with President Reagan, because who knows what might happen. So they turned their artillery around and pointed it to the north. President Reagan's footprints are still painted on the floor of Guard Post Collier in the DMZ today. Some of the soldiers painted around his boot when he stood there. And he made those comments before he left the DMZ that he'd never been more proud to be an American than the day he visited the DMZ. And that's built off the foundation that you veterans built as you fought that war alongside your South Korean counterparts. Next slide. Now let's go back. That's a lot of good news, but it's still a very, very dangerous place. The leadership of the DPRK of North Korea has really injured and damaged their own country for decades now. But as they've done it, they've continued to progress. Their nuclear weapons program is definitely real. We're talking about a nuclear weapons program in Iran. Well, there's a real one in North Korea. I won't put out any classified information at all, but I think there's a very clear indication there are at least 50 deployable nuclear warheads in North Korea, and they now have created at least 3 intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of carrying some of those warheads all the way to the United States. I often wonder what the North Korean soldiers that were sent to fight for Russia in the Ukraine, many of whom have been killed and wounded. But what was the price? What did North Korea extract from Russia to be able to get those soldiers to come fight for them in the Ukraine? I also often wonder if any of those 50 nuclear warheads have been sold or for sale right now. Personal belief, supported by some intelligence assessments, the North Korean regime will do anything to keep itself in power. If they had the opportunity and could sell a nuclear weapon and it was necessary to keep them in power, I'm convinced they would do it in a heartbeat. They use human trafficking and the sale of North Korean citizens to work in foreign countries to help prop up their regime with contract labor. But they also have used some of that money to develop and are in-house producing third generation tanks and aircraft to replace the old Soviet equipment that they've been using for years and years. And they've been doing that now for over 10 years, and some of it's pretty good. Next chart. You've all seen this slide before with all the lights on down in South Korea and all the lights not burning in North Korea. Sometimes I think we take too much out of this slide. Certainly, the 51 million citizens of South Korea live a much better, much more supported quality of life than their 27 million, I think, counterparts in North Korea. But it's not just a matter of lights on at night. North Korea has continued to develop their industries and develop weapons to support the maintenance of their regime. But South Korea has really taken off. The thing that really jumps out at me as I look at the picture of South Korea there at the bottom is how large Seoul has grown. Since the Seoul Olympics, Seoul has quadrupled in size. When I was there in the mid-'80s, you got to Seoul and you got down across the river, and I watched them building the subways for the upcoming Olympics. But now Seoul is a megalopolis that spreads all the way to Suwon or beyond. So if a fight broke out in South Korea today, it would be a much different fight than the one you gentlemen fought, because Seoul would soak up division after division after division from either side just to try to get through it. It'd be a heck of a fight. Next slide. One of the greatest pieces of news, I think, that's come out of this alliance is how the South Korean economy and the South Korean industry has begun to really develop capabilities for themselves. That's the K2 fighter. It's a 4.5 generation, fourth generation plus fighter that they now are flying alongside F-35s that they purchased from the United States. They are compatible. They're compatible with other nations in the Pacific like Japan and Australia. They're using it in their Air Force, and they're even selling it if others want to do it to help them generate funds for their modernization. The Black Panther tank, which is there at the bottom, is compatible with any NATO tank, any force in NATO, and it is 4+ generation itself. I believe we should all feel very proud about the fact that the foundation that our Korean War veterans laid allowed the United States and the South Korean government to maintain an alliance that's kept peace on the peninsula and is ready to respond if they had to do it with force. So from an old vet myself, to all of the U.S. vets and the ROC vets that are here today and their families, thank you for the contributions you made to the nation. And to all of you Korean vets who served after the armistice, like me, my major congratulations to you on the contributions you made to help maintain the peace for all these years since the armistice was signed. God bless all of you, and thank you very much.
General Brown, thank you so much for your remarks. We're going to have a complete shift in program right now because Ms. Sarah Yoon is going to take over for us to guide us through the Korean cultural performance, which you will find amazing. Sarah, if you could take over. And if all of our guests can now exit the stage and go to the audience because we need space for fan dancers.
Microphone do we have?
Just that one.
Can we not close it? From the back?
안녕하세요. Good afternoon. Are you ready for some Korean cultural experience? Yeah. Let's start. First, we'd like to introduce the Jindo drum dance. The Jindo drum dance is a traditional Korean performance that is believed to have originated from the use of drums during rice planting in Jindo Island in Korea. Over time, this practice evolved into a vibrant dance symbolizing community unity and the hope for a bountiful harvest. Music, please. Volume up, please.
Start over. Start over.
I'm sorry, can you start over? Volume up, please. here are two options. We can either sit quietly for 5 minutes, or I can invite a couple to sing Arirang. Arirang? Okay. Let me welcome Jenny Kim and Jin Suk Yang to the stage. That's a